The Last Postcard from Tangier, a story inspired by Somerset Maugham. Chapter 1. The postcard arrived in a dull London morning when the light lay like dust on the windows and even the sparrows were subdued. A view of the strait with a rim of white city and the faint loom of Spain across water as flat and metallic as a blade, the same cheap chromolithograph that was sold outside the Grand Socco when Geoffrey Harland had last been young in Tangier. On the back, in a slanted hand he had not seen for 40 years, were 6 words: "Come to Tangier before it is too late." It was signed with a letter that could have been an I or a flourish, the old ambiguous joke of a woman who had liked to leave doors ajar. He stood with it between finger and thumb as if it were a specimen of something delicate and faintly obscene. He had kept papers all his life, kept them as a man keeps a cellar, catalogued, numbered, corks aligned, but there are papers you cannot file, and time had taught him that the past is only tidy when you are not looking at it. He made his decision with the economy that had made him useful. He would go at once. It occurred to him that men of his generation had traversed the world for duller reasons. Besides, there was nothing in London to make delay seem anything but cowardice. He packed a suit that would pass muster, the black tie suitable for any outcome, the faint fragrance of his late wife's cedar drawer clinging to the wool. On the way to the airport, he found that the thought of seeing Iris Belmonte again had not the tumult he would once have feared. His mind merely felt unstoppered, as if a bottle left uncorked had begun faintly to breathe. Chapter 2. The city, from the aeroplane, was as he remembered it, which is to say it had changed entirely. Tangier's terraces shone like crockery along the curve of the hill, and on the shore new hotels stood where there had once been villas, inhabited by women who smoked with the ferocity of men. Heat got into the car with him like a familiar vice. The driver's name was Karim, a thin young fellow with an unassuming manner and a watchful reserve that reminded Geoffrey unpleasantly of junior staff. At the hotel, he discovered, with the particular species of disappointment reserved for those who travel to meet ghosts, that Iris had died the week before. "Monday, sir, after sunset," the receptionist said, as if noting a bus departure, and there was a package for him with a notary's card attached. "Madame Belmonte left this with instructions," the clerk said, and the stiffness of his English made the phrase sound like a judgment. In the room, he unwrapped a lacquered school box bound with twine. Inside lay 6 notebooks of the cheapest lined paper, the first page neat, the last smudged, and a smaller envelope with his name. He sat by the window where the light fell kindly and read the single sheet. "I did not send for you to forgive me. I sent for you because a life like a map is useless unless it is unfolded. Please unfold mine and then yours. I." He ran his finger along the edge of the paper and thought, with the rueful precision of an old civil servant, that events had once again conspired to present him with work at an inconvenient moment. He opened the first notebook with the same reluctance and curiosity with which a surgeon contemplates his own X-ray. Chapter 3. "I ought to begin not with beginnings," the first entry ran in a legible hand, "for beginnings deceive, but with the middle, when one already half knows and pretends otherwise. Your tie was too carefully knotted that night at the legation, Geoffrey. No one here knotted so carefully unless he had just come from telling a lie. The pianist was playing something Spanish to please the wives, and the air smelled of gin disguised as punch. You asked me if I found Tangier tolerable. I said it was not obliged to be tolerated by me. You laughed. You always laughed when a woman answered as a man might. Afterward, you told me I looked like trouble. I told you looked like tidiness, and trouble, as anyone knows, adores tidiness. I could have married any number of lovers. Instead, I married a city, and cities make the least faithful husbands. When you kissed me on the terrace, I thought you wanted to be good. It took me years to understand that goodness bored you. You preferred neatness, which is cruelty that keeps a diary." From the window came the cry of the muezzin, thin and insistent, and it seemed to Geoffrey that Iris, alive in ink, had timed it as a sort of tart accompaniment. He read on, "You told me you were a small man with a small job. I was young enough to find modesty attractive. One learns later that modesty can be a mask the powerful put on when they are busy taking off their gloves. You explained that people here were liable to be confused, and that confusion was dangerous. I believed you then. I believed most things said in a low voice. He closed the book for a moment and leaned back, surprised by the physical sensation of the past rising like heat, by the little anger he felt that she had the last word now, and took it so extravagantly. Chapter 4. He walked to the old streets to cool himself and found that memory, like a shabby cicerone, pointed out changes he would rather not have noticed. The Spanish grocer's with its tins of apricots had become a cafe pretending to remember the 60s. The tailor's stall where he had once procured a suit that wrinkled in the right way was now bright trainers and a boy who did not look up from his telephone. He stopped in the shade of an alley and thought of the manner in which men of the service had always recommended patience. Wait, and people will show you who they are. It had been advice for others. He did not recollect applying it to himself. Karim materialized as if conjured by the idea. Monsieur would like the American Legation Museum? He asked, and Geoffrey regarded him with the dry amusement old men employ to hide gratitude. Another day, he said. Benchacrown the notary? Do you know him? Everyone knows the notary, Karim said. He knows everyone. The notary received him with a politeness whose only luxury was time. Madame Belmonte anticipated your arrival, Benchacrown said. She left the diaries with me and a sealed envelope addressed to the young man. Which young man, she did not specify. He pushed forward a receipt to sign, and Geoffrey, seeing his own name among the columns, had a faint intimation of the way a man's life is merely an account that one day is to be balanced. Back in the room, he opened the second notebook. Iris's voice was now cool and businesslike. You said you needed eyes. Mine were good, and a woman's eyes are thought to see without being seen. You said there were men who met near the abattoir, that they were sentimental about ideas. That sentiment makes mistakes. Take a message, you said, ask nothing, say little, bring back the reply. It is a curious thing, Geoffrey, that harm is most easily done by those who ask the least of you. Chapter 5. The entries that followed were a study in minute obedience, and they had the terrible calm of a ledger, a date, a place, a name that even now had a certain romance. Marnissi Ben Said, the student with the scar who sold cigarettes one by one. The abattoir smelled of confirmation, Iris wrote, as if the animals had been right about us. I took your message folded into a theatre handbill and was told to sit where a beam cut the light into narrow stripes. Men in jackets worn to velvet argued in whispers about ports and wages and something they called dignity. I had always believed dignity to be a posture acquired at dressmakers. They meant that sort you cannot see until it's taken away. When I brought you back their answer, a time, a street, I thought I was adding harmless information to a heap of other harmless information. You smiled. You said, that will do very well. Geoffrey shut the book and found that his mouth had dried as if he had been speaking for a long time. He had not thought of the abattoir for years. In those days, the service had called such fieldwork gardening. Pull a weed here, nip a bud there. He went down to the bar and drank a soda water as if abstinence could mimic virtue, then walked to the terrace where the sea made its meaningless promises and sat long enough that the light changed its mind. When he returned to the room, the air had cooled, and the third notebook lay where he had left it, as patient as accusation. You were kind to me, Iris wrote, and kindness is the most effective disguise. With kindness, one may do anything. Chapter 6. What the fourth notebook did was pull a thread he had not known was attached to everything else. When I told you I was late, Iris wrote, with that offhand bravery women cultivate, you kissed my wrist and said you would fetch me aspirin. I knew the instinct you were obeying, which was to be useful. You always preferred to solve a problem rather than sit in a room with it. My husband had taken to wandering by then. He found politics where there were none and mislaid them where there were. I had an appointment at the Spanish hospital. Sister Agatha, who disapproved of worldly matters, accompanied me into the world without a word. The child came easily as if apologizing for the fuss. I've wondered since whether he came easily because he knew he was leaving at once. When I woke, they told me the baby had been taken to the nursery. You brought flowers and the day's paper and looked tired in the way that is attractive in men who live by their wits. On the bassinet next to mine, someone had left a postcard. Your postcard, the view of the Kasbah and the sea. It seemed a jest, and I do not know when a jest becomes an omen, Perhaps at the moment one is no longer laughing. He could taste in his throat the old, unsought dread that had come to him in crises when men appealed to virtues he did not possess. He shut the book with the instinctive distaste with which one shuts a door on smoke and decided foolishly that a visit to the abattoir would clear his head. The place, now a ruin daubed with declarations nobody would keep, stank of urine and damp stone. A boy kicked a ball and studied him with the harrowing frankness of the poor. There was nothing to see. He had known before he arrived there would be nothing to see. He went back in a temper that felt like youth and found Karim in the lobby reading a small green book. "You know the hospital?" Geoffrey asked. "Which one?" Karim said, then smiled in apology. "They changed names, like people." Chapter 7. He read the fifth notebook as an addict drinks the last bottle with curiosity that disgusts itself. "They told me the baby had died," Iris wrote. "They brought a nurse whose eyes had the dulled charity of the overworked. She recited a phrase about God's will as if God were a clerk who had misfiled a request. Sister Agatha said nothing. She placed her hand on my forehead in a manner that could be pity and could be restraint. I sent for you. You did not come." Later, I saw Sister Agatha in the corridor speaking to a gentleman in a beige suit, the color favored by men who prefer not to be remembered. I saw the corner of the postcard peeping from his pocket like a handkerchief. It will amuse you to know that for a long time I tried to believe there were 2 postcards in Tangier that year. He got up too quickly and felt the room tip, sat again with the dignity of a man who refuses to let furniture make a fool of him. Iris continued, "I made a nuisance of myself. I threatened. I cried. A doctor grew impatient and told me cruelty in small matters saves cruelty in larger. I do not know if he had read it or invented it. When at last I understood that the child had not died but had been taken, the invention a courtesy for the loud, it occurred to me to go to the legation and make an enemy. But you were already my enemy, and one does not like to be the first to say such things aloud. I did nothing. It is astonishing how much harm is accomplished by people who have done nothing. It takes an age to think of that age." The page ended in a blot. When he turned it, the hand was smaller, as if she had been writing at a different table in a different house. "I left a note with the notary in case of my death. I wrote it in English because you dislike translation. You think it introduces error. You have always assumed your own tone is accuracy." Chapter 8. He could have stopped then, and a younger man would have, but old men no longer believe they can save themselves by refusing information. He told Karim to take him to the old American legation because it had a little library, of which the sort of Europeans who retire to Morocco are inordinately proud, and because administrators smell one another's ink. In a dusty room where photographs of fat men drinking thin tea hung at an angle, a docent with a military moustache remembered him from a photograph of a tennis match. "We used to play on the British compound," the man said. "You fellows kept your files like the Bank of England. You could eat off those files." Geoffrey smiled, for flattery trusts him like any other man. It took a donation and a telephone call to a clerk grown old in office, but by late afternoon he was permitted a look at a ledger of the sort nobody intends to survive them. His own signature leaped at him with the buoyancy of an old insult. He turned a page and saw memoranda with that firm, impersonal tone men adopt when they are arranging harm. The phrases were as bland as a nursery. Liaison, adjustment, removal. There was no mention of infants. The service in its wisdom never named a thing it handled. He copied a number into his notebook, though there was nobody to whom the number would mean anything now. On the way back, Karim drove without comment. "Do you remember Madame Belmonte?" Geoffrey said. Karim's hands did not move on the wheel. "Everyone remembers her who knew her," he said. "Some who did not know her remember also." It is the trouble with good lines that one hears them too late. Geoffrey let it pass. He thought of the woman who had laughed at his tie and of the girl who had bled discreetly under the eye of a nun, who believed the world was an error one should correct without fuss. He thought, too, of the thick, faintly shining paper on which memoranda had once gone to men who would never know that a phrase in the passive can ruin 3 lives with the decency of a stamp. Chapter 9. The 6th notebook was thinner. Grief, at the last, writes small. I address you now, it began, not because I imagine you will be ashamed, you do not cultivate useless emotions, but because there are facts you have mislaid in the tidy attic where you keep yourself. You did not answer my letters, though I wrote you 3 in the year I left Tangier. It was a protection, I suppose, for both of us. I learned years later that the child had been taken first to the Anglican orphanage and then passed to a family recommended by a gentleman whose recommendations carried weight. His name appeared in the newspapers when a certain road at night surprised him. Apparently in England the roads are as treacherous as men. The boy grew and grew angry. Anger is a kind of growth when one has nothing else to do. He returned to Tangier because people return to the scene of a theft as they return to the scene of a love. I found him by accident. That was not an accident. There are women's accidents and men's. We had tea on the terrace where once you asked me whether I found the city tolerable. He was very polite as men who have reason to fear their own tempers must be. He asked for nothing. He had your mouth. Geoffrey sat up as if the words had nudged him in the ribs. I told him nothing. It was not my secret to tell. If he is kind to you, it is because he has learned kindness for himself. He is the young man of my sealed envelope. When you come, he will see what I have written, and he will choose whether to let you go on being tidy, or whether, as a last grace, to oblige you to unfold. I have asked him not to be theatrical. It is a fault of this city. Geoffrey had, in his time, listened to taped confessions, read depositions, watched traitors attempt to edit themselves in the very moment they were most legible. He recognized the rhythm of a confession when it approached its moment. People become careful. They grew almost prim. He set the notebook down, drew the curtains against a sun that was no longer there, and opened the envelope Benchicrown had said was for the young man. It contained a key and a slip of paper with a bank's address and a box number. He put it on the table. He knew a summons when he saw one. Even at his age, he had not forgotten how to obey. Chapter 10. The bank manager had a manner Geoffrey disliked, a mixture of respect for rank and amusement at the follies of foreigners. He had met it often in careers both colonial and post. In the private room, the clerk turned a dial with a small theatrical flourish and produced a thin file tied with the string that in this part of the world has replaced the ribbon as a symbol of official memory. Inside lay carbon copies on onion skin, the sort that make a man feel he is reading a palimpsest of himself. The first was addressed to a liaison officer whose name Geoffrey recognized as one of those contemptible craftsmen who spare gentlemen the sordidness of execution. The tone was bland as snow. Proceed with removal under cover of scheduled action at abattoir. Ensure Sister A cooperates. Necessary to avoid later embarrassment. The initials at the bottom were his own. There is a talent some men have, which is to read a line and know, as if measuring a body, whether it fits them. He did not need the second memorandum, which was worse. No record of issue beyond routine event. Adopt standard phrasing for maternal briefing. Arrange subsequent placement through P's agency. Do not use local intermediaries. There was a list of amounts to be disbursed and a note in a rounder hand. Brake line accident, regrettable, but contained. He sat very still and considered the years he had spent learning to be still, and how at the end of it, stillness was all that was left to him. Iris had included, out of a delicacy he did not deserve, a single page in her own pen. You told me once, as if it were a joke, that the only unforgivable sin in your world was embarrassment. I confess I always thought embarrassment a small god to whom one need not sacrifice. I see now you were prepared to sacrifice anything to it, even a child. I do not ask you to remember that the child was yours. You will remember it with your bones. He felt in his chest the old, thin pain that had accompanied policy decisions, then the larger, ineffable ache that no policy covers. He had thought, like many tidy men, that sin abhors documentation. He saw from his own cool signature that he had been wrong. The third carbon was the coup de grace. It was the note he had sent himself. There are such notes, and they often betray more than any diary. Use postcard signal to initiate. Objective must be clean. He had left a postcard by the bassinet like a calling card one leaves on a tray. The detective in him, that petty, vulgar functionary without whom large matters do not progress, saw the simple chain. A baby taken, an adoption arranged to a couple whose sudden misfortune relieved any future anxiety, A career made by an operation the chief had called brisk. The gentleman in him wished to object. The man in him could not. Chapter 11. It is one of the ironies of age that one learns how to confess after nobody asks you to do it. Back at the hotel, he found Karim in the lobby, as if men of Karim's sort were always in lobbies waiting for someone else's decisions. "I have something for you," Geoffrey said, and gave him the envelope Iris had left for the young man. Karim did not feign surprise. He belonged to that large class of people whom surprise has always ill-served. They went up to the terrace because there are conversations that require a horizon. Karim opened the envelope, took out the key and the slip of paper, and placed them on the table without touching them. "You have been to the bank," he said. "I have," Geoffrey replied. There was no point any longer in gentility. "You know, then." Karim looked at the sea and smiled, not like a victor, but like a man who has taught himself to perform simple tasks in the right order. "I know as much as she wished me to know," he said. "The rest I leave to you. It is not my profession to judge men. You have colleagues for that." Geoffrey had not noticed until then that the young man's hands were those of a careful worker, nail beds clean, knuckles scarred by trivial accidents. "She wanted me to give you the postcard," Karim added, and slid it across the table. It was the same card that had summoned him, a cheap view of a city that believes in the glamour of its own cheapness. On the back, in Iris's hand, were the original 6 words and a little drawing of a knot. "She said you would understand," Karim said. "She said you liked knots." The old man found, to his irritation, that his eyes had watered. "I arranged it," he said, "because a certain pedantry insists on exactness even at the scaffold. I arranged it all. The operation, the story they told your mother, the adoption, the accident. I did it to spare myself consequences that I considered vulgar. I thought I was doing the work of my country, which made me feel clean. I see now I was only doing the work of myself." Karim nodded with the grave attentiveness of a junior officer listening to a superior's defense. "She said also that you will think of reasons. She said, 'He is clever enough to invent better ones than the truth. Let him have the truth. It is less clever.'" He rose to go. "I will not hurt you," he said, and there was something exasperated in the mercy. "She forbade it. She said you were to be left with the diary, which is heavier than a stone. The notary will make his own arrangements. They like papers. It is their way of justice." Chapter 12. He slept badly and woke early, as if the night's sheets had been a net in which he had thrashed and only just escaped. In the mirror, a careful man regarded him with a sort of bitter curiosity, as if asking what had become of a colleague who always knew where he put his things. He went down to the sea because one is obliged to provide the body with simple views when the mind is crowded. The horizon lay like a line drawn with an unfirm hand. Gulls made their wretched sound. He thought of Iris writing in the afternoon, and of those men who had once received his memoranda and filed them with the reverence a priest reserves for a wafer. Men now dead, promoted to biography. He imagined them with their prim smiles taking in the news that one of their number had been betrayed by the very neatness that had once earned him their esteem. He had the unworthy desire to beat them to the jest. He could not think what the jest would be. He returned to the room and opened the notebooks again, as if there were a remedy he had missed. The last entry was brief. "I did not ask him to come so that I might forgive him," Iris wrote. "We are vain when we forgive. It is another way of keeping center stage. I asked him to come because the past is not a place but a person, and the only way to leave it is to see that person as they are. If he says he did what was necessary, tell him that necessity is merely the name tidy men give to their convenience." He tore the postcard in half because ceremony requires little sacrifices. The halves lay like fish on a plate. He began to pack his suitcase, folding a shirt with that precise care one extends to the last tasks of a day one has spoiled. At the door he paused and looked back at the lacquered box on the desk. For a moment he thought of leaving it, as if leaving the box would effect the miracle of leaving what it contained. Then the man he had been, so deft at completing procedures, returned to him and he took it up, because even now he could not leave something unaccounted for. On the flight north he ordered a soda water and did not drink it. He sat with his hands on the box and stared at the cloudless sky. It occurred to him that a map well folded takes up no room at all, and yet contains entire countries. He had spent his life folding maps. Someone at last had obliged him to unfold. If there was mercy in it, it was the small mercy of being made to see that the knot he admired had been tied only to keep a door closed. He had opened it. On the tray table lay one half of the postcard he had absent-mindedly taken up, and on it the white strip of the kasbah turned into a scar. The stewardess asked if he needed anything. He shook his head. A tidy man, after all, is difficult to help.